Hello, nice to see everyone. Yes, hello, I am Emily and I'm from Cardiff University Otter Project, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my PhD and also about the Otter Project, and then how you can all get involved and how we're really asking you to spread the message of reporting otters to us. So we are all about the otters. And specifically, it's the Eurasian otters that we're interested in. So in this country, we've only got Eurasian otters. That's our only native otter. So no matter if you're looking in a river or looking off the coast of Scotland, it's the Eurasian otter that you're looking at. They've just got slightly different behavioural adaptations for different locations. And if you're lucky enough to see an otter in the wild, like this one, finding its food, then do look out for its lovely streamlined body, which makes it easy to swim in the water. It's a very powerful tail. And then one of my favourite facts, which is the nose and the eye and the ear are all lined up in a line. You can see that on the bottom left. And that means that when it's swimming, it can be pretty much submerged in the water with just its head poking out on top. And so it can use all three senses while it's swimming. A sight like this is pretty rare. You'd be pretty lucky to see an otter like that in the wild because they are very elusive animals. So it's if you want to find out if you've got otters in your local area, the best way is probably to look for their spraint, which is their poo, and they leave it on prominent locations like mounds or rocks, and it's used for communication. So leave it where it is because the otters are trying to communicate with each other. But you can have a look in there. It's got a nice sort of musky smell, sweet smell, some people say, and you can look out for the bones of the vertebrae, the bones of the vertebrates that it has been eating, like fish and maybe some amphibians. You can also look out for its footprints as well. So on soft mud or sand, you might see the footprint. They're different to dogs because they've got the 5 toes up the front, and you're looking for a print that's about 6 to 6.5 centimetres wide to be sure it's an adult otter. So you are now more likely to see an otter in the wild, or at least its signs, than you have been for a very long time. And that's because in the 1950s, the 1970s, the population went through a really big and rapid decline. It was quite catastrophic for our otters, and it's widely accepted that that was due to new chemicals coming on the market. So PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and some pesticides called DDT and dieldrin. And they killed off the otter or caused reproductive harm, and therefore the otter's ability to reproduce was poor. And you can see in this graph, which is from the 1970s, late 1970s, that the sightings of otters or their signs, so looking for spraint and things, was not very much. So we've got really low numbers of otters, especially in England with those light colours. And since then, these chemicals have been banned and the otter has been protected. It's an EU protected species. So now, with the most recent published survey, which was 2009 to 10, you can see the dark colours mean that the otters are coming back. And even in Kent, still low numbers, but there is now a population there. And that was the last county to get otters back. But we can't rest on our laurels. We need to be thinking about the future. We need to be thinking about the current threats of human activity on our otters and on all our freshwater environment. And part of that is all about water quality, and that's what I look at. So why is it that the otter was particularly vulnerable to these chemicals that entered into its environment? Well, to answer that, let's think about all the different sources of chemicals that we've got. So just all the chemicals that you've used today, so fire retardants are on your sofas and clothing. You've got oil and water repelling compounds that are put in all sorts of products like frying pans and water repellent coats and food packaging. You've got the actual industrial process of making all those chemicals, and that's going to be producing waste. Once stuff goes off to landfill, then the leachate from that will get into our waterways. So we've got lots of different sources of the chemicals getting into water. The concentration of those chemicals in the water will probably be very low, because it's just small amounts more this to the bodies of our small invertebrates, and that's called bioaccumulation, just the building up of those chemical contaminants in the body, in the tissue of an organism. And along comes a fish to have its meal for the day, and it's not just going to eat one little invertebrate, it's going to eat a whole bundle. And so the contaminant load that moves from that first trophic level into the fish is going to be much higher. That fish is going to get a higher dose of the chemicals. And then along comes a bigger fish. You can probably see where this is going. It's going to eat a bundle of smaller fish, and so its contaminant load is going to be greater. And once we get up to the top predator eating its meal of the day, it's going to get the highest dose of the chemicals in the water. And that process is called biomagnification, just simply the increase in the concentration of chemical contaminants as you move up a food chain. So from very low levels in the water, we are now potentially at levels that are going to cause harm to the otter. And that's what we really need to understand. So by studying chemical contaminants within the otter, and that's what I do, I look at their livers to find out the contamination levels, we can understand what levels the otter have got and whether that might cause harm. And we can also better understand the levels that we've got in the environment, because we can actually measure the levels that we can see in an otter, whereas if we were to look in water, it might not be possible to actually detect those very low concentrations. And we can also see whether those concentrations are actually bioavailable. That means, do they actually get into the food chain and into our wildlife? The second good thing about studying the otter for chemical contaminants is that we can use it as a sentinel. So because we can detect those levels, we can look at how concentrations are varying over time. So in different years, is the concentration going up, is it going down? And we can also look at relative concentrations across the country. So if we got certain areas that have got higher concentrations, other areas that have got lower concentrations, and why is that? What sources are in those different areas that means that there is a high concentration there? And that's really where the impact of my research will be focused, in terms of what mitigation or legislation is needed to be put in place to bring those levels back down to a reasonable level. And that is where all of you guys come in, the public. We are so reliant on the fabulous public across the country reporting dead otters to us. Most of these dead otters are roadkill, an unfortunate but inevitable result of all the roads crisscrossing across our country. And people ring and they say they've seen an otter. And then we've got national organisations like the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, and also local groups like otter groups, mammal groups, that will go out and collect the otter and send them to us. And then all of those otters undergo a post-mortem. So as I said, I want the liver, but we take all sorts of different organs to look for all sorts of different things. So you can look for genetics and the variation of genetics across the country with muscle and blood. You can look at diet and how that varies across the country. In the past, we've looked at scent and the scent glands, that so that odour that's placed onto the spraint that I showed you at the beginning, and how that's used in communication. So all sorts of different research that's undertaken. And in order for us to get a really good picture of otter ecology and freshwater contamination across the whole country, we really need otters from every part of the UK. England, Wales is looking good, and Scotland is somewhere where we've started collecting more recently, so that's why it's a bit more patchy. But if we just zoom in a little bit on this picture with the dots that show the otters, and we just look at the more recent ones, you can start to see that we are getting a bit of a collection gap in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. So I'm hoping that everybody watching will maybe have some friends in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire who you can tell them about the Otter Project and get them on board for reporting otters. And if anybody there is in a mammal group or wants to start an otter group and help us with the actual collection and delivery, that would be great, because then we can make sure that we get collection from across England, Wales and the parts of Scotland that we've got. And for everybody else who isn't in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, keep ringing and keep telling us about otters so that we can maintain our collection networks across the rest of the country. There are the numbers. Obviously, at the moment, collection is pretty much stopped because of COVID, but once that gets up and running again and the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales and the IOSF can get back out on the road, they'll be collecting again. So ring those numbers. Those QR codes are very clever and will make a contact straight to your address book in your phone. You want to do that, and the numbers are also on our Facebook and our Twitter and our website, and there's lots more information there, and you can get in contact with us there as well. Thanks very much. I think that's everything.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. Do we have any questions to start? See, the chat's just gone. Is that a cool question from Sabrina? Biomagnification means the otter is accumulating a lot of contaminants. If it then poos these out, will the vertebrates that might feed on the poo then start the process again from the start?
You cut out in the middle. I think that was, so they consume a lot of contaminants and then it basically comes out in their waste. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and will the process start again on that basis?
So some contaminants can be metabolized and therefore removed from the body. But for these sorts of contaminants that I'm looking at that bioaccumulate, they accumulate in the liver and in some other organs, and they'll basically just stay there and build up over the otter's life. So we can see higher concentrations in older animals than young animals. So they kind of get locked away and cause trouble from that side. Some of the contaminants have been shown to be excreted in lactate, so when a mother's feeding a pup. So in some ways the juveniles also get a dose that way as well, and the female will lose some of its load that way. But for the contaminants that aren't metabolized, they basically build up over the otter's life.
Cool. I had a question because I can't stop thinking about COVID. I've somehow related to COVID. So you were talking about otter populations, how they declined in the 70s. Do you think, given the sort of widespread reports that humans being indoors has actually been beneficial to nature, do you think it's been beneficial to otter populations as well?
I think it has, yeah. I think for sure less cars on the road can only be a good thing for the roadkill. Definitely. And just in general, less sort of human activity, less disturbance from humans will probably help them. Whether that means that they might become slightly more bold in the short term and they need to learn to sort of stay away again. I mean, I saw a video on social media a couple of weeks ago of an otter that entered a shop and it was spotted on the CCTV. So maybe that will sort of start to be a conflict when people are let back out again. But I think overall it's going to be positive.
Oh, we have another question. I kind of lose track when I just take over the chat. Do you know if otters in Wales have more accumulation of contaminants?
It's a very good question. And it's pretty much what I want to find out. So I have just had some data back from the labs where we send the liver. And that is now my job, is to sift through all that and work out where we've got sort of hotspots in the country. So from previous work on contamination with those pesticides that I was talking about, DDT and dieldrin, there is obviously more contamination of those where you've got the arable land that used those particular contaminants. And then with the PCBs, because it's mainly an industrial chemical, is higher in sort of areas with industry, so cities generally, more urbanized areas. So it kind of depends contaminant to contaminant, I suppose. Wales versus England, difficult one to judge. I think with Wales being more rural, it's probably going to have a lower contaminant load, but that would need me to check.
Cool. So I don't think we've got any more questions coming through, although I do think you've tugged on some heartstrings here. As your co-presenter has said on the side note, the saddest thing he's seen in a while is a dead otter. So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a really sad event that roadkill gets killed on our roads, and wildlife gets killed on our roads. But it is inevitable, and I think at least with sort of this project, we're taking what is an untimely death and we're putting it to really good use. I mean, all of that otter is used in various research, and it's for research for its own species, to conserve its own species. So although it is sad getting a delivery of lots of dead otters every couple of weeks, at least we're putting them to good use, I think.
Cool. I think you've got another question through. I will try and make this the final one just in the interest of time, but I'm sure none of the speakers will object if you find them on the directory and email at some point.
Yeah, sure.
Are all otters used independently of their age?
Yes, it kind of varies. We're very interested to know about sort of contaminant load with age, and age is something that's quite difficult for us to judge, but we have different categories of juvenile, subadult and adult, and they sort of become subadult at about 1 and adult maybe at about 1 or 2. It's big when they become reproductively active. So although we can't be sort of that precise about how old they are, we sort of divide them into those categories, and we can look at contaminant load with those different categories. If we just solely want to look at a sort of time frame, so maybe we're just looking at how contaminant load is changing across years, then we'll just maybe take subadults because we know that they're sort of a smaller potential age group, if that makes sense, whereas adults could be anything from 1 to maybe 4, whereas subadults will probably just be sort of 1 year age category.
So I lied, you have another question, although I've been told it will be a quick one. Charlie, do you want to give your question?
What's happened? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I put my audio in there. I'm currently in Lincolnshire with otters in the garden kind of on a daily basis. We're kind of on the river. Are you in contact with anyone in Lincolnshire already, or do you know of any groups? Because if not, I'd be more than happy to organise getting one circulating.
Yeah, I would really be interested to talk to you. That's fantastic. So, you happen to be there. We don't know of any otter groups in that area. So yeah, we would really like to either work out if there is one that we can tap into, or get someone to organise one. So yeah, that would be awesome if you want to get in contact. Send us a message on Facebook or something, and I'll reply with some more details. Brilliant.